Alright guys, so I'm back with another video. In this video I'm going to show you guys how to set up a contextual animation scene for synchronizing two animations. Now this one, I have two setups here. One of them has the root coming off the ground, which is actually probably more appropriate, but it's more difficult to get that perfectly in sync. Because you're entering flying mode and things can offset you when you're in flying mode. So it's a little bit more difficult. And in actuality, the other method that I used is probably actually more appropriate for something like this. So I'll discuss the problem that I ran into when trying to set up this flying mode one. It was a really big problem and it was confusing, and I had to figure out a workaround for it. But I believe that it may be an oversight by the developers of, and I'll report this as a bug just in case it is, and maybe they can fix it. But basically, it's related to how the motion warping target is done and the fact that you're in a crouch. When you go into flying mode, it resizes the capsule instantaneously, and there's no way to stop that. The character movement component does not give you the option to override that feature. And so So anyway, I had to find a workaround for it. I did find a workaround. I'll just go ahead and show you guys how it looks. So from behind, it actually looks perfectly in sync. And yeah, I did disable foot IK because I just did that temporarily because something was overriding it and causing it to not have foot IK. I'll look into that, but this isn't actually going to be the one that I'm primarily going to be showing you guys how to set up, although I will show you. I'll discuss how I did this one later, but I thought I had the rewind debugger open. I guess I turned it off. So I'll go ahead and do this again so you can see it from the other side. So let me just go ahead and pause that now. And if I scrub through this, you'll see it's actually pretty in sync, but in truth, it's a little bit off, I believe. So I may have to look into why that is. But you probably can't even tell unless you look real close, but it is a little bit off. Especially like right here. It's supposed to be farther forward. And in actuality, I think it's supposed to be a little bit farther to the right here. But let's go ahead and look at the other one that I did. And now on the other one, this one is actually easier to synchronize, and it's easier to synchronize it perfectly because you're not putting him into flying mode. So when you enter flying mode, that's what causes the problem. So I don't think I need this right here for that, but anyway. So this is actually the fix that I had to implement, because when you go into flying mode, it automatically resizes the capsule instantaneously. And when it does that, I believe that the character movement component, I believe it interpolates the offset of the mesh right here and relative space as the capsule is being resized. Now, by default, the game animation sample project that I'm in right now, it actually by default has the mesh set to -88, but the capsule size is 86. Now, that actually causes a serious problem because when you play a montage and you motion warp into it and the capsule gets resized, it causes a 2 centimeter offset. So just be aware of that if your mesh is offset by a different amount than the capsule's half height right here, then it can cause problems whenever you whenever you're trying to motion warp a montage in situations where where he has to leave the ground, where you have to enter flying mode and he has to leave the ground, it will cause problems blending out of that, where when he blends out of it, he's, for example, in this situation, if this was 88, negative 88 still, then whenever he would blend out of it, he would be blending out of it from his root being 2 centimeters down. And so the character would pop up instantly because it would just be reset. And the reason why that is, in regards to the contextual animation scene, is because it actually automatically handles your movement mode for you, and it'll put you in flying mode for you so that you don't have to. But anyway, the fix is that I had to set him to uncrouch. And the reason why I needed to do that is I needed him to be set to uncrouched so that the character movement component would release his capsule half height. Otherwise, if I tried to set this to 60 after entering flying mode with him in a crouch state, then the character movement component would just ignore that change on the capsule half height. At least from my understanding, whenever I tried to do it that way, that was the results I got. Is it seemed like it was ignoring it, so I had to uncrouch, reset it back to 60, which is the crouching half height, and then I had to this cached world value for the mesh, the skeletal mesh. I had to reset that back to the world location because when I uncrouch and I change the capsule half height back, it actually incorrectly offsets the skeletal mesh in relative space. Well, I don't think it actually does. It might actually be offsetting the capsule. Maybe not. Anyway, doing this actually prevents the problem where he suddenly instantaneously pops up at the end of the animation. So this corrects that offset. So anyway, and of course, if you do this, you either need to reset this back to the default capsule half height at the end, or you need to put them back in crouch. Because if you don't, and you entered this from a standing position, he didn't get uncrouched, then when you get back to the end of it, your character will suddenly pop down so that his legs are dangling under the floor. So that's something to take note of as well. So anyway, that's the basic rundown on that hacky method I had to use. So I'm just going to overwrite that, and I actually don't need this here, and I don't need that either. Now the setup for this itself in this situation is actually going to be fairly simple, and we're going to do this from scratch. I actually already have the project open and ready to show you guys. Just bear with me because I'm trying to get some information out to you before I commit to showing you guys how to set this up. So I'm just going to set this back to this other one. Okay, this one needs to still be in walking. Oh, no, this one does need to be in flying. Okay, I was looking at the wrong one. So this is the one that has the flattened root. So on this one, let me just open this up again. So on this one, you'll see that the root actually leaves the ground, you know, and it moves around up here and stuff like that. And then he comes back down onto the ground. Now, that was the one that you was just seeing a minute ago. Now on this other one, if I can open it up here, on this other one, I have a version of this where I have flattened the root out. Now this is actually going to be much easier to set up and to synchronize between two actors than one where he has to come off the ground. But in some situations, you're not going to be able to cheat like this. Whereas in situations where it's player versus like two characters interacting and they're both moving, it's going to be far easier to accomplish that with this. Now, he doesn't go that high up off the ground. The character doesn't, so he does mostly still stay inside of the capsule. Now, granted that I probably should have made sure that the root bone stayed underneath the pelvis, and I may actually fix that and re-upload these animations later for you guys. But it's only it's only kind of out of sync there at that one little part when he first starts sleeping off the ground. So I don't think it's really that big of a deal. And in fact, right here, it's actually a little bit forward from the pelvis. So anyway, so with this one, you'll see that we still get decent results, but you'll see the capsule never leaves the ground. And this one is going to be far easier to set up, and it's going to be far easier to get perfectly in sync. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe, yeah, I think that other one was off, because you'll see right here, his hand is like almost perfectly on the back of his head. There's a little bit of desynchronization there, but I think that was my fault, because when I brought these animations in, I had to make some modifications to them, and I probably overlooked the fact that I created that offset while making some modifications to their initial poses, because I did have to correct their starting and ending poses slightly. Well, the attacker, I had to modify his starting and ending poses because there were some slight offsets on them, and then I had to, for the victim, I had to modify his starting pose because there was a slight offset to it. So when I did that, it probably actually caused this problem where his hand is just a little bit further into his neck and head / jaw, and his hand back here is just a little bit inside of his head. So that's probably what caused that. But the animation happened so fast, and most of the angles that you view this from, you won't even be able to tell. So anyway, it's basically perfectly in sync. There's just a few problems that I may have caused when I was modifying these inside of here. So, but I could have also overlooked them before exporting this from iClone. I didn't look at it that closely, I don't think, but I don't remember seeing his fingers inside of his head either, so that could have been something that caused when I was exporting or importing or modifying. But anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. So I've already exported these animations right here, the flat ones with the flat root. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to set that up, because it's going to be the easiest one to pull off. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a blank Gasp project. Now, I have not rehearsed this, and I'm going to create a different folder. There's too many folders in the animations folder. I'm just going to call this takedown, and I'll import those animations. Let me see if I can remember where I exported them to. Yeah, here we go. These right here. And I named those buffered because I added some buffer frames to the beginning and ending of them. Oh, and I didn't actually show you that, so let me just go ahead and show you this. I designed this in such a way that you don't actually have to be crouching to do this. If you don't, then you'll see he kind of like starts to crouch and then he jumps, which actually I think is a good thing because it makes it actually more believable that he's actually jumping from a standing pose. But anyway. I may or may not have to look back at this if I run into any problems, but I don't think I will. So let's just go ahead and select import only animation and select the UEFN. I'll explain some issues and some problems and some slip ups that that contextual animation scenes can cause you when setting them up. Now, sometimes they do bug out, and you have to if you're having weird problems with them during the setup, and if things just look really wrong, it could possibly be that you're missing something or not understanding something, but it could also be that it's bugging out on you. And there have been a few situations where I've actually had to recreate the contextual animation scene itself in order to fix that. But they're still fairly new, so just keep that in mind as well. I'm going to call this CAS as in contextual anim scene. And then I need to actually enable a plugin. So go to Edit, Plugins, and under Animation, if you scroll down a little bit, make sure you have animation warping enabled. We're going to need that. I'll go over that as well. And then you need contextual animation, experimental. So it is still experimental, and I believe that means that you may have issues trying to compile it with this plugin enabled. So just keep that in mind. You will need to restart it. Man, it's been pretty hot around here this past week. There's been 2 days this past week where it was like around 85, 86 degrees outside, which is crazy because it's supposed to be winter. And normally it stays pretty cool in the winter. I mean, not like cold like up north, but it stays cool, like nice, comfortable weather down here in the south. But anyway, so after you've restarted it, go to animation, go to contextual anim scene right here. This is what you want. I'm just going to name mine CAS takedown. And now you need one more asset for the roles. We need to go to miscellaneous, a data asset, and then you're going to choose contextual anim role asset. Ignore this contextual anim scene asset right here that shows up in here. I don't believe it serves any purpose. I believe that's actually what this is, but if you try to create this way, in fact, I'll just go ahead and create it just so you can see what it does. Let's see. Maybe they fixed that. Okay, the last time I did it this way, it actually opened up without this window right here, this viewport window, and it also, it opened up all weird. So maybe you can't actually do that. That's weird. And I know in 5.4, you couldn't actually do it that way, but it looks like maybe you can now. So yeah, we just need a contextual anim roles asset. I'm gonna call this one CAR takedown roles. And now in here, I'm gonna create 2 roles. And I'm gonna call this one the victim. And then I'm gonna call this one the attacker. And now I'm actually going to make the attacker a character. Maybe that's not necessarily a good idea if you're doing, it could be. I don't know. I may have to go back and experiment with that. Because I tried this yesterday, but I was having a whole lot of problems trying to figure out how to fix that one problem I was telling you about. that this fixes, but I only actually just figured out that this actually fixes it. I only just now realized that you could fix it this way. So I may go back and experiment with that. So let's actually just, if you do is character, you can set this, and I'll just go ahead and do 86. I'm going to show you how this works. And I'm going to set this to 30. Now, why am I choosing those values? If we come over here to our blueprint folder, and you'll see the CBP sandbox character. If you come over here and you choose your capsule component, you'll see we have 86 and 30 here. Now, I'm going to show you something here real quick, actually, so that you can understand something that's specific to this project. If I come over here to developer and I go to bones, you can see the bones. And now if I actually select this guy, select his capsule component and scroll down, let's see, where is it? Under rendering, if I uncheck hidden in game, now I can see his capsule. So if I come down here, you'll see his capsule stops right here, but his root bone is right here. Now, the reason why his root bone is right down there is actually because, and this is the problem I was telling you about that you have to watch out for. If I come over here to the right view and I scroll in here, you'll see that he's actually below the capsule. So if we select this mesh component, you'll see his origin is right there, 2 centimeters below. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but it can cause problems, as I was telling you before. You'll see that this is 88, not 86. So I'm going to say 86, and that'll put it right there. Now, if I come in here and I do if I do the same thing, I eject, and if I unhide that capsule component again, now you'll see that the root is actually right there at the bottom of the capsule. So why is that important, and why is his feet still on the ground? Well, his feet is still on the ground because we're using foot IK, so it corrects that. And the reason why this needs to be at the bottom of the capsule is because if you do use that motion warping along, well, if you put them in flying mode and you do motion warping that way, then when the animation is playing, it's actually going to, the character movement component is actually going, whenever it gets resized, we'll actually put it right here rather than 2 centimeters down, at least from what I saw. So that's why I'm warning against that, against having the offset anything but the capsule half height. So it can cause problems in different situations. So just, take heed. If you decide to do it that way, it can cause problems. So anyway, that's why in here I would do -86 because this is the mesh to component, and the component is actually the capsule in this case. And so I would do -90 there. And so if I come back over here, you still won't see anything, but that's fine. It'll automatically add this stuff right here whenever we set up a new anim set. So the way that this works is you have your role asset, and the role determines which character belongs to which animation, or which animation belongs to which character, so on and so forth. It's also important for determining who the primary role is. The primary role is always going to be the thing that is being interacted with by something. So if your player is opening a drawer, your drawer is going to be the primary role. Or if you're opening a door, the door is going to be the primary role. Or if you're attacking a character from behind, then the character is going to be the primary role. So there may be ways to get around that by having a median as a primary role. But one thing to note is that everything revolves around the primary role. So your primary role cannot actually be offset within the scene. It has to be at the origin of the scene. So that's the reason why the primary role is so important. So that's something that you need to take note of right now, because um, if you want to have two characters like interacting in here, then you need to be careful how you set it up if you don't have one of them as the primary role. If both of them need to be offset in the scene, then you're going to have a median as a primary role. And I may show an example of that later on. I'm going to keep doing these sections for this series, so just watch out for that. Okay, so starting off, you cannot have an animation sequence within a contextual animation scene. They have to be animation montages because they play them for you as montages on the characters whenever the scene starts. So we're going to have to create anim montages. Now it's going to go ahead and set this up for me by default, because in the Game Animation Simple project, your full body slot is actually your default slot. So I won't actually need to come in here and change the slot, not on this one. You'll see it's set to default slot. If we actually go over to the character and we open up the animation blueprint, and we go to the anim graph, you'll see right here we have the default slot. And this happens before the offset root bone, and that's important because when you're coming at it, when you're blending out of this default slot, it needs to start accumulating the root bone offset right here so that it can keep the character grounded. Otherwise, your character may snap from looking this way, from standing this way to standing facing this way. That's if you didn't have this right before the offset root bone, then that's what you would see. So anyway, that's how that works. So something else we need to actually do is we need to actually come back into these animations, and we need to enable a root motion for them. And when you enable root motion, you should see this little line on the ground. This is your actual root bone trail. This is the path that your root bone takes over each frame. So each of those little dots on that path represents a keyed root bone transform. So we need to browse to this, and we're going to open up the victim. And I'm going to set this to have root motion enabled as well. On this one, I want to motion warp. So this is where that part I was telling you about, like where I don't really have a whole lot of frames to work with for motion warping here, because like I could have a longer reach during the jump to motion warp, but because I made the animation like this, where he immediately starts wrapping his arms around him as he gets up there, that kind of causes a problem, because if you motion warp during this part right here, then his arm will go right through the back of the other character's neck, depending on how far away you are or how close. So that's why you need to take note of that. I may go back and alter this. If you're seeing this now, then you may see an altered version where the arm doesn't wrap around until after he's fully on his back. I may do something like that. We'll see. But anyway, from what we're going to do is we're going to right click and go to add notify state. This creates a window that we can dictate where it starts and ends at. And if you have motion warping enabled, you should see this motion warping one here. And we're going to add that. And you'll see these two diamonds here. And you can drag those out, and those determine where it starts and ends. And now in Unreal Engine 5, you get this neat little visual that shows the path along your root bone where your motion warping is going to occur. So we might actually want this to start right here. Let's see. Okay, is it bugging out on me? Oh no, it's just, it was a little bit further out than what I thought. I think there's a delay right there. Yeah, so I think it's actually safe to put it right here. If you motion warp right here where he's standing still and you enter this animation from a moving, then it could cause foot sliding. Now, in the one I showed you earlier, I actually did have this from here out to somewhere around here, I think. So you can try doing that. If you get foot sliding, then just move this out about about 8 frames, because I added 8 buffer frames to the beginning of this. And that's actually where it starts at frame 8. And you actually don't want this so far out. So you actually want it to stop motion warping when his arm starts to wrap around. So something like that. But that's a really tiny window there from 8 to 13. That's only 5 frames that you get. So that's the reason why I went ahead and just matched it across that entire thing there. But maybe I could add a few frames where it actually is sitting still. So that should work. Now, something else I want to do is whenever he touches the ground and he's starting to come to let go of the player, I actually want to fire an event here. So right about here, frame 98, I'm going to add a notify event. I'm going to call it on ground. You can call it whatever you want. Leaving target. Maybe I'll rename that to leaving target. Let's see. Okay, it won't let me rename it. Okay. I thought you could rename those. Let me just call off target. Now, I forgot to do this. So on the motion warping, go to the config and expand to the root motion modifier. And I'm going to call this on target. And we actually don't need to change anything else there. We're good to go. Now on the other character, the victim, on the victim, whenever what we're going to do is we want to go to the blend out and we want to set the blend out time to 0. And I'll explain why that is. So this is something a lot of people don't actually know. And they'll come in here and they'll try to add a notify to the end of this. And then if the animation is blending out, when this notify fires, well, it'll never actually fire. So you have to fire your notifies before you start blending out of your animations. Well, not necessarily actually. I think they'll still fire, but in our case, what I actually want to do is I actually want to pause the montage. So it never stops. So we never leave this montage. I want to pause it. And in order to do that, I need to fire as close to the end as I can. Otherwise, I can't pause the anim montage if I'm blending out of it. So set your blend time to 0. And then we're going to add a notify here called dead. And so if he's dead, we want to pause the montage. Whatever montage is playing, we're going to pause it. So over here on the animation blueprint, we're going to go to the event graph. And we're going to right click and say death. Let's see. Dead. I think it was dead. So you'll see an anim notify dead. Actually, let me rename that. I can't rename that. So I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to create a new one. I actually want to call this on death. Let me just call on death. On death. So on death, we want to do montage pause. And so if you move your mouse over this and read the tooltip, it says pauses the animation montage. If reference is null, meaning it hasn't been set, then it will pause all active montages. So this is what we want. We don't have to do anything else. That's handled now. Now for the attacker, I actually want to handle that event as well. And that event is the off target event. So off target. So I'll get the sandbox character, and we'll have to create an event over there. So over here on the character blueprint, somewhere in here, wherever you want, I'm just going to put it at the top. I'm going to create a custom event, and I'm going to call this on off target. Let me just call it off target. Yeah, it'd probably be easier to. Seems weird to say on off, so I'll just call it off target. And I'm going to call off target. And basically what I want to do is I want to give the user control back of the character as soon as he starts stepping off the player, because I want to reduce the amount of time that the player has no control as much as possible. So I'll say enable input. Actually, I could leave input enabled. What we could actually do is we could just say yeah, I think maybe we'll just for now, there's other ways to handle this. Oh, that's motion warping. Let me see. Yeah, let's oh, okay, no, okay. So I actually don't want to use that method. So you can set I'll just show you. You can set the movement mode to none, and if it's set to none, then movement is disabled. But in this case, we don't want to do that because that means that our root motion animation won't work. So we'll just use disable, and we'll use enable. Let's see, enable input. And we may not actually have access to that. On mine, I already have the player controller cached, but I don't think they're caching it here, as you can see right here. So we could just use this method, or you can cache it on begin play so that you have a reference to it if you want. It's up to you. So I don't know if the regular controller, okay. Okay, no, it needs a player controller, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so for an NPC, you'd probably have to handle that differently, but you could do that off of the cast failed in this situation. So moving on, all of that primary stuff is taken care of. Let's finish setting up the contextual animation scene. I think I've spent enough time talking about that. So I haven't actually assigned a role asset. So over here, we need to assign the role asset. And we need to choose the victim, in this case, as the primary role. And you can update roles, but it doesn't matter right now if you update it or not. Now you have this override preview data, but you actually don't really need to set this up. But it will allow you to choose a victim and choose if it's a skeletal mesh, an actor, and it gives you a better visual If it's an actor, you can choose the actor class. If it's a skeletal mesh, you can choose the preview skeletal mesh in the preview anim instance, and it'll play that anim instance on the skeletal mesh. And then the montage, you'll see how the montages play over the top or on that anim instance from this preview. So that could be helpful. So I'm just going to close or delete that because I'm not actually going to use it. And then I'm going to create a new anim set. Now, something that you need to take note of is the section name. If the section name already exists, it'll add a separate anim set for each role with the assigned animation and movement mode settings. So you'll end up seeing that role right here, and then you'll see section 0 and section 1 if you have 2 animations for each of them. And it'll show that on both of them. So in this case, I'm just going to call this take down behind. And I'm going to type an assassinate, and I'm going to choose the victim animation for the victim. And for the attacker, I'm going to choose the attacker one. I'm going to leave this in walking because I don't have any Z root motion on this one. It's just moving the root on the X and the Y. And now I'll explain to you how I got it to work like this, but you'll see that the character is already in place and everything is already in sync. And it's because I designed and did my animations a very specific way. If I didn't do my animations in this very specific way, then he would be standing in the same place that the victim is right now, and I would have to manually offset him. I'll explain to you guys how I managed to do that in a video after this one. I'll go over how I did the animations. So in this video, I'm just showing you guys how to set it up, and I'm trying to explain everything to you. So we can go ahead and play that, and we'll see how this will actually look if it's perfectly in sync inside of the game. So any flaws that you see right here is actually a result of the of some errors that occurred when I was bringing them in. So I may go back and fix these errors. Well, remember, I changed this starting pose after I brought these in. In iClone, these were perfectly synchronized. But iClone has a tendency of offsetting things, and so I had to correct those offsets for the starting poses of each character. And because this character is in a slightly different starting pose now, that's the reason why we have this offset where his arm is actually inside of him. And in fact, whenever he moves his foot around here, I believe it probably also caused that right there. Either that or I overlooked that in iClone whenever I was synchronizing these. But yeah, so there you go. So when you see this, these problems may actually already be fixed. Just a heads up. Now, if you scrub to the very beginning of this animation, you'll see this little green guy here. Now this is showing the orientation of this character, the true orientation of this character, and offset from this guy right here. He'll be at the origin until you've set up motion warping. So he'll only be offset whenever you've set motion warping targets up. So in our animation, if you remember, I set up a motion warping and I gave it the warp target name on target. That's with the capital O and capital T. If we come back over here and I select the attacker right here, I just click him on this timeline here. It'll open up this selected anim track category right here. And if you don't have anything selected, then you probably won't see that until you've clicked on something. And then you can expand it and you'll see this stuff right here. You can change the movement mode. You can add selection criteria. I'll go over that in a separate video. and you can create additional mesh up to scene offsets inside of here. So for this setup, we don't actually need to use this mesh to scene offset stuff. I think in another one I did, but that was before I realized this trick for getting those to just come in here perfectly in sync, which, like I said, I'll explain how I did that in the next video, next part of the video for this. So now what we need to do is under our, actually over here, you'll see that it automatically added override preview data for us. And that's the reason why I didn't actually make it earlier. It'll make it for you. If everything works out right, it will make it for you. Now, if you've already added some to this, then it will not make them for you. And it will not change the ones that you made. If that's the case, you may actually have to recreate this in order to correct that. Because if you change that, I think it might be permanent. The radius right here, I believe, is for auto activation. We'll probably use that in a later video. In this one, we're not going to. The collision behavior, we need to set this to ignore channels. You can set ignore actor when moving, but it'll only ignore the other actor's collision while this character is actually moving. So I actually want to just set ignore channels, and I'll add a collision channel for each role, and this will be the victim, and this will be the attacker, and I'll just tell it to ignore the pawn, and that's it. Now the problem with this is if you do this and there's something in the way between you and the character, then you will collide with that and it will stop you during your motion warping. It may not stop you outside of the motion warping, but I do believe it'll stop you and offset you during the motion warping. So just keep that in mind. I have not experimented with the attachment params, but the IK target params are very useful. I'll probably go over that in another video as well. I'll experiment with the attachment params to try to see if I can figure out how to utilize those. But I already have a good idea as to how to handle the IK target definitions for each role. We're not going to need those in this one though. You can change the sample rate, but I wouldn't recommend it. 15 is probably good. You could probably even set it lower than that. But this is just basically the frame rate, like how often it will update the alignment positions. Because something to note is whenever we set this up, and I'll show you. So let's go ahead to the active section. You need to have this section right here selected. If you don't have any animations down here, it's because you need to select the section. Sometimes when you create a section, it actually won't select it. And so you won't have any tracks down here, and you'll have to come up here to sections and select it manually. So once you've selected a section and you have an active section, you'll see the active section section, and you can expand it and go to warp point definitions and add one warp point definition. If you have two warp points in your animation, you can add one for each. So if I was motion warping from frame 60 to 70 and from frame 5 to 15, then I could have two different motion warp definitions in here. And the thing is once you fill this out and you play this, like I'm going to show you how to play it, then it will automatically handle all of this stuff for you, which is why this is so cool. That's why I really like these contextual animation scenes. So I need to set the warp target name to the same one I assigned to that warp point on the animation, which is on target. For now, I'm only going to show you guys how to do this for the primary actor. I'm not actually sure what use case the custom or the socket one will be, but I'll try to find a use case for it and then go over that in another video with you. Now, sync animations. I'm I'm not actually 100% sure, but I believe that it just simply ensures that they both start at the same time. Also, in case you weren't aware, there's also some new nodes. I'm not sure if they're actually new nodes, but I believe they are, where you can actually sync let's see. I believe. Okay, well, I ran across it at one point. It might not be called sync. I'll look for it later and update you guys on that in another video. But there's actually a built-in way to play two animations on two different actors synchronously inside of Unreal Engine now. It actually may need a plugin to be enabled, but I don't think so. I believe all the main plugins that would probably affect that in this project are probably already enabled. Anyway, once you've done this, update the work points. It'll ask you if you're sure. Work points should be updated while previewing the scene with the meshes the animations were originally authored for. Are you sure you want to continue? So I'll say yes. Now you'll see that little green guy is actually where he's supposed to be. And if we scrub through here, you'll see this little diamond here. And that diamond is actually showing you where the attacker is going to motion warp to. So let me save this real quick because what I'm about to do might actually crash it. And the other project, it kept crashing it. It may do that in this one. So if you double click on this animation down here, okay, it's going to crash it. Yeah. Okay, so I've done this before, and what it's supposed to do whenever you double click on that animation, and maybe I can get it to do it in here on one of these that isn't using the buffered one. Let me see if I can. Oops. Let's see. Okay, come on. So if I come over to this one, let me see if it. Oh, that one's using it too. Okay, let me see if I can find one that's using a different one. Let's try this one. Yeah. So, okay, I don't know why it's suddenly doing that. Now, I've done this before and it's actually worked, but for some reason now it just wants to keep crashing. Basically, though, whenever they fix this, hopefully in the next update, if you double click this, it'll actually take you inside of that track, and it'll actually show you a separate track that represents where the motion warping is on this timeline for this animation. And you can actually adjust the motion warping inside where the motion warping begins and ends from inside of here. So it's currently bugged out and it causes it to crash for some reason. But I've actually, just yesterday, in fact, I actually had it working. So it may be working on your end. For some reason with mine, it's just not working. So anyway, now that we've got our motion warping targets set, we're pretty much good to go. That's all we have to do on this. Now we just have to set up the logic inside of the character blueprint. So I'm going to right click on here and I'm just going to say keyboard. And I'm going to say 0. And then I'm going to press this button here and I'm just going to say F. So when I press F, it's going to activate this. Now, what I'm actually going to do is create a function here. And I'll actually call this the start contextual anim. Actually, before we do that, one thing you need to note is you need a motion warping component in here. You just come up here and type in motion warping. And if the plugin is enabled, you should see this under the movement category right here. And then there's one more thing that you need to do is select the mesh. And I'm not actually sure if it's necessary, but I believe it is. So if inside of your contextual animation scene, if one of your characters, one of your actors in this, if they are not marked as a character, then I believe it'll actually look for their skeleton. So that's why we need to actually have this as a child of the skeleton, because I believe it probably walks up the chain and gets its owner to see if its owner is a skeletal mesh. I could be wrong there, but if you just type in contextual anime scene actor, you'll see it. And we're just going to add that right under here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to do a line trace, and then after that, everything else is really simple. So I'm going to do a line trace for objects. I'm going to do it for objects, not, okay, I don't want to multi. Line trace for object. Line trace for objects. And on the object type, we're just going to say make array. And we're going to say pawn. So if we select this capsule component, we scroll down, you'll see that this is an object type pawn. So that's why we're doing a line trace for object types pawn that are marked as pawn. So you can add a list of actors to ignore, but we don't need to. And so what I actually want to do is I'm actually just going to, and there's two ways to do this, because in actuality, the root does not necessarily represent the direction that the character is facing. So if we come in here and I look around, let me just do this here. If I come over here, and that made it lag for a second. So you'll see that my capsule is rotating as I look around, but the character is not. Okay. Now the reason why is because the offset root bone inside of here is actually counter rotating it. So until I press my right mouse button, he won't actually turn in place. And that's because the offset root bone is accumulating the offset of my capsule, and it's rotating the root bone in the opposite direction. So the mechanic of this is going to depend on how you want to handle it, but I'm just going to get the actor location. Actually, let's just get the actor transform. And I'm going to say break. You could also do this. Let's see. I don't know if they've cached. I don't think they did. In mine, I cached a reference to the enum instance. No, yeah, that was something I did. So if you get enum instance, and I'm just going to cast, for now, I'm just going, on mine, I used a blueprint interface function, but on here, I'm just going to cast to it the ABP sandbox character. If you were to do that, and then you get off of here and you say root offset, okay, maybe root transform. Root transform. If I get the root transform, that will actually be the direction that the mesh is actually facing. Getting this transform will not be correct, because the root is actually being counter rotated and relative to the mesh component. So the mesh component could be facing this direction, but the character is facing this direction, because the mesh is actually rotating with the capsule. So if you wanted it, if you needed to actually get the direction that your character is facing, that would be your root transform. That would represent where he's actually at, because it will offset him in location and in rotation relative to the skeletal mesh component. So in this situation, I'm just going to have the line trace ran from where I'm actually looking, from the direction my capsule component is facing. So I'll just get the forward vector of my rotator. And since the actor transform is actually the center, is actually right here where the arrow is, not down here, I don't even have to really offset it. You could offset it up if you want, but I'm not going to. If he's crouched, like if my character is actually crouched down here, then it'll be shooting it out from his, the center. So I'm actually going to add right here, and I'm going to start it at the actual location of my actor, and then I'm going to multiply this by a value. And what this is going to do is it's going to get the direction. Let me actually show you from the viewport. It's going to get the direction that my character is actually facing, and if I multiply it by 100, it's going to choose a location 100 centimeters in that direction. And the reason why is because the forward vector is going to be, it's going to be a unit vector, which has a magnitude of 1. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to set this to a float single precision, and I'm going to set this to 100 centimeters. Now in actuality, this animation was actually designed for being, if we come over here and we select the root, for being he's supposed to actually be 85, almost 86 centimeters behind the target whenever this activates. But because we're using motion warping, we can cheat a little bit and allow it to happen further back. So the further back you put this, the more odd it may look. So within reason, motion warping can help you cheat. So that's basically it for this. I'm just going to do a branch here to make sure that we actually hit a character, a pawn. And then I'm going to break this, my hit results. And I'm going to actually get the hit actor here. And I'm going to cast this to a CBP sandbox character. And if it's a CBP sandbox character, then what we want to do is we actually want to get this contextual anim scene actor off of it. Right here under variables defaults. So if I were to scroll all the way down to the bottom and go into variables and look under defaults, then we should see get contextual anim scene actor along with all these other components. And then I'm going to get the scene I'm going to set the scene asset. And you can also create a helper function for this. So if you see a variable entry where the target is below the actual thing you're setting, then that probably means you should use a helper function. I think it's considered best practice, but it's not actually going to hurt anything to do it this way. It's just a little less safe. So we want to set that to our takedown. And in actuality, since this is a function, we can actually have that as an input. And let me rename this. And now down here under variables, you'll see get CAS ref, and this is a function parameter. The function parameter, in case you didn't know, that's a function parameter. And you can identify it by this little icon it puts above it, which is new to 5.0. Before, there was no way for you to know if it was a function parameter, a local variable, or what. But they added that, which is really nice to have, and I'm glad they did. So now that we got a reference to our scene asset, or we've set our scene asset, I should say. Now what we need to do is we need to, off of this, if you scroll down, you can see contextual animation scene. Contextual anim and scene asset, and you'll see all the stuff that the scene asset itself has. And what we actually want to do is we want to create a contextual anim scene binding for 2 actors. And that's just going to set these guys up for this contextual animation scene. It's going to register them with it so that the contextual animation scene can force these actors to play these things. I'll go ahead and explain. So it'll change their movement modes. It'll play the anim montage. It'll even go so far as to change the capsule half height. So if we come over here into our role and we go over here to to the preview capsule half height, and we set this to 60, as long as they're not in flying mode, it will actually resize their capsule. So if we're in walking mode, and we set this to 60, if it's at 86 when we play this, it'll resize it to 60. So I believe I did some testing earlier and I thought that's what I was interpreting, but maybe I'm wrong. So I may have to go back and check. So maybe take that part with a grain of salt. Anyway, so we're going to make a contextual anim scene binding. Just remember, guys, that everything I know about this, I figured out on my own. So keep that in mind, because I'm the only, I figured it out on my own, and then I made videos on it. So we're going to make a contextual anim scene binding, and these just need to be to the actors. So the secondary role is going to be this guy who is trying to attack the other one. And this guy is the victim, and he's going to be the primary actor. So if you come back into here, if you remember, we have a primary role. Well, the victim is the primary role, and so the attacker is the secondary. Or whichever role is not the primary role will be considered a secondary role. So I'm going to make sure that this returned true, and if it did return true, then I'm going to actually grab this let's see. Yeah, this is a getter node. So I'm going to actually do another one here. Under contextual anim scene asset. No, I believe it's off of this one. Start. So we're going to start the contextual anim scene. So this one has separate options. So if we scroll down and look under contextual anim scene actor component, we have our early out, get bindings, get IK target by goal name, get IK targets. We have a lot of helper functions here. On left scene, on joined scene. Don't worry about those two. I'll explain those in another video. Start contextual anim scene, transition, so on and so forth. So we're just going to start the contextual anim scene, and that's all we need to do. And these out bindings are going to be the in bindings for this. And I'm going to correct that. And I think I'll just move this one up here. And then we're going to do another branch. And maybe I'll do a return here as well. We don't actually need to do anything off of this right here, but I'm going to do that anyway. And so I'll actually do this as well. So that's all we need to do for that. So back over here, what we want to do is we want to call this, but first we actually want to do this. Like I said, you can cache this if you want. It really makes more sense to cache it, but for the sake of this video, I'm not going to. So I actually want this to be like so. And so we actually want to call this off target if this returns false. Like I said, we could have done that from inside of here, but I'm going to handle it right here. That's going to be personal preference. Actually, this needs to be on false. Sorry. So if this fails for some reason, then we want to actually give the player control back of his stuff. So now we need to set this to the takedown. And now we'll see if I missed something. So I'm going to put another player out here. I'm going to start. Yeah. And so there you go. And if I crouch, which I'm actually supposed to be crouching, then it'll look more accurate. But I designed it in such a way that, you know, you'd be able to do this when not crouching. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you appreciate the animation because I made that myself. Well, I didn't make it completely. I corrected it. I retargeted it and corrected it, so and synchronized it. So and made a lot of altercations. I made a lot of modifications to that. And this is driving me nuts right here, this thing right here. So let me actually show you guys how you can remove this. So if you go into editor preferences and under viewports right here, and you scroll down, you should see, maybe I went too far down. Let's see. There should be a preview. Oh yeah, preview selected cameras. So this is the camera preview size. I don't know why it's set to 5. I think it's ridiculously large. It takes up like 60% of my screen. But yeah, now you'll see it's really tiny. Or if you want to save performance because you don't care about looking through the cameras, you can just disable that entirely. And now it won't do that. Because when you're looking at the viewport and it's rendering 5 cameras over here, now you're rendering the scene 5 times and it'll really slow stuff down. So I normally just disable it because it gets in my way and it's aggravating and it slows stuff down. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's basically the rundown on it. So I actually went over the root motion. Did I go over the? No, I don't think I did. So let me actually, I guess, it looks like I've already closed this one. I'll go ahead and go over it with you real quick. I kind of went over the hack that I used for it, but I'll go ahead and kind of explain to you the differences in the setup that I performed for that one. And I'll actually, I guess, go ahead and I'll provide all of those animations, the ones with the actual root offset and the one with the flat root. So let's come over here. So yeah, I have it set to flying mode whenever he plays this animation on this one, because he needs to leave the ground. If we are in walking mode, he will never leave the ground. The capsule will never leave the ground. So if this happens from a crouch state, then we need the problem is that when the capsule gets offset, it screws stuff up, which is, I explained that part to you. But on the motion warping, I actually have ignore Z axis turned off, and that makes sure that it motion warps not just the X and the Y, but it also motion warps up along the Z, and that will keep things in sync. So in actuality, this animation is actually perfectly in sync. The offsets that you saw were actually a result of, that, of something that happened when I was trying to correct the starting pose, right? So whenever I was making those modifications to the starting pose, I think it might have offset some things. So I may go back and correct those. So when you get them, you may not even have those offsets. So anyway, I'll actually add both of these. But yeah, that's the only difference, is ignore Z axis is disabled right here on this one. Everything else is still set up the same exact way. Inside of here, I have it set to flying mode, and I had to use this hack right here, where I have to uncrouch them first. I have to set the capsule half height to 60, back to 60. You could probably also get that by get crouched half height. You could do it this way as well. And then you can, you have to cache its actual world location, not its relative offset. So you have to cache its world location, because the relative offset, I'm still not entirely sure why that's the case. I'll have to go back and look at it a little closer. But we have to get the world location and then set the world location back. And I use teleport just to be safe after we uncrouch, and then we set the capsule half height back to what it was when we were crouched, and then we teleport him back to where he was. So I'll go ahead and show you what happens if you don't force it back into crouch afterwards. So actually, let me I have to set this back up. Yeah. And I don't think that delay was necessary there. So if I set this back up, and I'll just temporarily enable that just to make sure. So if I come over here, you'll see looks fine for the most part. No real serious issues with it. But if I if I start from a standing position and I don't do that, yeah, so he kind of jolts. Actually, before I actually saw him go back, I actually saw him go under the ground. So I don't know why that didn't actually happen that time, which is kind of weird, but yeah. Oh, huh. Yeah, it's still doing it. If you do it from a standing, okay. Maybe I did need that delay until next tick, or you might need a longer delay than one tick if you do it from a standing. Okay. Let me just, yeah, that is, okay, I just want to make sure that was, oh yeah, so his feet go under the ground. Yeah. Huh, okay. Well, this fixes it if you do it from a crouch, but it seems like maybe it didn't fix it from a stand. I thought it did, so maybe I accidentally changed something somewhere on this, because before it was not doing that, even when you were standing. But yeah, anyway, this was the reason why I didn't go with this method, because there's problems whenever you're going into flying mode from a crouch. I had to use some weird hacks, but anyway, I'll go ahead and include those animations as well. Anyway, so, and I'll see you guys in the next video.